Earlier today, we received the job report for April. These numbers tell us what we already knew, that right now, Canadians are hurting because of this pandemic. Everyone has their own story, but it all boils down to a very difficult time for a lot of people. Canadians aren't alone in this, as the world faces COVID-19. But if you're out of work, you don't need to hear that other people are out of work too. You need to know that there's a plan to get you through this and get you back on the job. And that's exactly what this government is focused on. Today,
we received the employment report for the month of April, and the figures confirm what we've known for some time now. Many of you are suffering. You're hurting because of this pandemic. And what matters most to you is knowing that there is a plan to help you get through this and return to work as quickly as possible. And that is what our government is focused on.
Unprecedented challenge, we've taken action. Maybe you're one of the more than 7 million people getting the CERB to help make ends meet. Or better yet, maybe thanks to the wage subsidy, your employer has been able to rehire you. That's what happened for people who work at Pursuit, a Banff tourism company. They're back on the job because of this program. We created the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy to protect jobs wherever possible. Since it launched last week, employers have applied for subsidies for almost 2 million workers. And as provinces and territories start to gradually reopen over the coming months, and the CERB becomes less and less needed, this subsidy will play an even greater role. That's why I can announce today that we will be extending the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy beyond June to help kickstart our economic reopening and boost jobs. We'll have more details next week, but to businesses hit by COVID-19, know this: the wage subsidy will continue to be there for you to help you keep your employees on the payroll. So fill out the application at canada.ca if you haven't already done so. And if you had to let people go, try to bring them back. It's those workers who will drive our economy's short and long-term recovery. On other support, the Canada Emergency Business Account has been accessed by well over 500,000 businesses to give them much-needed loans. Between the CEBA and the wage subsidy, we're helping employers across the country keep Canadians on the job. Now, even though we're reaching millions of Canadians, we need to reach even more. We're working around the clock to update and adjust so that help gets to as many workers, small businesses, families, and young people as possible. We also know that some sectors have been hit especially hard, so we're stepping up on that too. Minister Baines will be leading a new Industry Strategy Council, chaired by Monique Leroux. This council will take a deeper dive into how the pandemic is affecting specific sectors and how to best support them. We're leveraging expertise from the economic strategy tables we set up in the first mandate, as well as looking to new industry leaders. This will be a dedicated forum for industry and government to come together on tackling the effects of COVID-19. And it builds on what we've already done for workers in everything from energy to agriculture. On that note, Minister Guilbeault will have more details at noon about how our $500 million package for arts, culture, and amateur sport is now being rolled out to support workers in those sectors. This investment will help people access wage support and help organizations access funding. Our artists, creators, and young athletes inspire us and help us feel connected even when we're at home. They're there for us, and we're going to be there for them. No matter where you work, no matter who you are, these are tough times. But with the right plan, we will get through this, and we'll come back stronger than ever. Le Canada
Canada is facing an unprecedented challenge, so we've taken measures that are also unprecedented. You may be among the 7 million Canadians who are receiving the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, or perhaps you were rehired thanks to the Emergency Wage Subsidy. We created that subsidy to protect jobs as much as possible. Since the launch of the program last week, employers have already applied for the wage subsidy for some 2 million workers. And today, I am announcing that we will be extending the wage subsidy beyond the month of June to kickstart the economy and also boost job creation. We will have additional details on this next week, but Canadian businesses affected by COVID-19 should know this. The wage subsidy will be there for you and your workers. I invite you to apply on Canada.ca if you haven't done so already. And if you had to lay people off, try to rehire those employees if possible. Those workers are the ones that will help us to kickstart the economy in the long and short term. Canadians want to work, so we're going to help them to return to work. Thanks to this wage subsidy, there are other measures, such as the Canada Emergency Business Account, that is helping employers to keep their employees on the payroll. Today, we also have news for the culture sector. Minister Guilbeault will be providing additional details on this, but basically, we are supporting artists, cultural industries, musicians, young athletes, and creators. To understand the consequence of COVID-19 on these sectors, we are introducing the Industry Strategic Council. It will be chaired by Monique Leroux, and the Council's mandate will be to take a deep dive into the effects of COVID-19 in specific sectors, and particularly to look at what we can do to support workers. We are taking advantage of the knowledge of and expertise of the economic strategic tables we put in place previously, as well as that of new leaders. We are going through a difficult time right now, but with the right plan, we will come back stronger than ever.
It's hard to think of tougher times for our country, but as our elders remind us, Canada has faced challenges before, and we've always overcome them. Today, we mark the 75th anniversary of Victory in Europe Day and the end of the Second World War on the continent. After 6 years of war, it must have felt like that day would never come. But it did. And it came because of the courage of all who served and because of the sacrifice of all who gave their lives. It has been 75 years since our grandparents and great-grandparents stood up to do their part. 75 years since they stood united and strong to ensure that we would live in peace and freedom. Today, as our generation faces our own battle, let us be inspired by them and their valor as we protect them and all Canadians. This is our challenge, and I know we will rise to meet it. Merci.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We'll now go to the phone lines for questions. One question, one follow-up. Operator.
Thank you. Merci. The first question is from Jamie Tashagumscum from APTN. Line open.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. As we all know, Indigenous communities in the North are vulnerable due to social conditions like lack of housing and lack of medical facilities. And it's been said that Indigenous communities are 2 weeks behind the curve. Now, with provinces relaxing restrictions, some of these communities might see that as a threat. Do you agree with that opinion? And secondly, what would your advice be to those communities?
From the very beginning of this pandemic, we have seen that and known that Indigenous communities, particularly northern and remote ones, are particularly vulnerable to the spread of COVID-19, given existing challenges around medical facilities, things like overcrowding and other socioeconomic realities. That's why from the beginning we have made specific investments to support Indigenous communities as the country grapples with this pandemic. Right across the country, as certain regions are reopening, there is a recognition that other regions are going to need continued adjustments and continued protections, and we will ensure that we continue to work all together on protecting Indigenous communities who are indeed more vulnerable, even as other parts of the economy are looking at opening up.
Follow-up, Jamie?
Yeah, okay, so they've been doing pretty well so far, but like I said, they're 2 weeks behind the curve. So with provinces opening up, what would you suggest that they do?
I think we need to make sure we're keeping extremely vigilant and preventing outside cases from entering those communities. We've seen, for example, Nunavut be very successful, not just remaining 2 weeks behind the curve, but months behind the curve as they continue to have no cases because of very strong travel restrictions that were brought in immediately and have served to keep the vulnerable and remote communities in our far north completely COVID-free. But right across the country, various communities will take appropriate measures, and we will be there as a government and other orders of government as well to support them in doing the things that need to be done to keep elders and all in those communities safe.
Thank you. Next question, operator.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Michel Lamarche, TVA Nouvelle. À vous.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. I'd like to know, since you are now talking about extending the wage subsidy, do you think you will do the same thing with the emergency response benefit? The Canada Emergency Response Benefit will already be continuing longer than the wage subsidy. And we also recognize that gradually, in the weeks and months to come, the economy will start to recover, and therefore fewer people will need that emergency benefit. They will return to work, and probably more people will decide to take advantage of the wage subsidy. That's why we're announcing today that we will be extending it so that it can be used for a longer period. But we will continue to adjust to what we're doing as the situation evolves. And from the beginning of this crisis, we have been there to adjust as required and enhance and improve our approach so that we can help as many people as possible, given the current situation.
From the beginning, we recognized that we needed to constantly adjust and improve the delivery of these unprecedented mechanisms to support Canadians who are suffering through this particular crisis. That's why we recognize that there are many different things we need to do as the economy starts to reopen. The Canada Emergency Response Benefit had always been planned to last longer, or had a timeline that was already longer than the wage subsidy. But we recognize that as the economy starts to reopen, people will be getting back to work, leaving the emergency response benefit, and perhaps going on to the wage subsidy as employers bring people back on and get them back to work as our economy picks up over the coming weeks and months. That's why we will constantly be adjusting to make sure that Canadians are getting the support they need as we look to carefully and gradually restarting our economy.
Une suivi, Michel?
Follow up?
Bien sûr, j'aimerais
Yes, of
justement
course.
savoir
I
cette subvention
would like to
salariale,
know, with
combien
respect
de
to the
temps, à
wage
votre avis,
subsidy,
il faudra la
how
prolonger
long
et
it
est-ce
should be
que devant
extended, or will
la
we need to
réouverture
extend
de
it?
l'économie,
And
il y a
will
des
the
craintes de votre
reopening
part? Là,
of
sentez-vous
the
qu'on pourrait
economy,
rater
does
cette
it cause you
relance
any
parce qu'on
concern?
déconfine trop
Do
rapidement
you
au moment
think
où
that
on se parle?
perhaps relaxing the rules is being
Depuis
done
le
too
début,
quickly?
on a souligné à
Well,
quel
right from
point
the
c'est
beginning,
important
we
de
have said
relancer
just
de
how
façon
important it is
graduelle
to
et
gradually
d'être
reopen the
extrêmement
economy
vigilant,
and to be
de
extremely
pouvoir
vigilant
surveiller
in order
comment
to
la COVID se
monitor
répand. C'est pourquoi on
how
est en train
COVID-19 is
d'investir
spreading. And
massivement
that's how
en
we
tests de
have
dépistage,
invested
mais aussi
massively in
pourquoi
testing.
nous devons
And that's also the reason
d'assurer que les
why we must
mécanismes sont en
ensure
place à
that the
travers
proper
le pays
mechanisms
au
are in
fur et à
place right
mesure
across the
qu'on
country
relance l'économie.
as the
La
economy
subvention
reopens.
salariale,
The wage
va être
subsidy
étendue au-delà,
will be
du mois de juin. On
extended
aura plus de
beyond
détails à
June,
annoncer
and we
la
will
semaine
have
prochaine
more details
là-dessus,
to
mais je
announce
veux
on
déjà
that next
dire
week. But
aux
I can
entreprises qui
already
sont en train
say
de
to those
regarder
businesses
comment ils vont
that are looking
pouvoir
at how they're going to be
s'approcher de la
able to
relance,
start up
qu'ils
again,
peuvent savoir que
that
la subvention
the
salariale
wage
va être en
subsidy
place,
will be
pendant un
there
bon
for
moment
them for
encore, et
quite a
donc
long time
ils
to
devraient
come,
commencer
and they
à
should start
réembaucher
right now
leurs travailleurs
to
pour
rehire their
pouvoir
workers
créer ce
so
lien,
that they can
entre
create that
travailleurs
job
et emploi
attachment
pour
with
bien
their
pouvoir
workers
relancer rapidement
so that we
l'économie.
can get the economy started again
Prochaine
quickly.
question. Operator.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Mike Blanchfield, the Canadian Press. Line open.
Hello, Prime Minister. Two successive job reports are showing that women in service roles have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. In light of that, what specific measures do you think are needed to strengthen Canada's economic recovery?
I think this is one of the first recessions we've ever seen that has so hard hit vulnerable workers in the service sector, particularly women and new Canadians and young people. And that was evident in the March numbers and continues to be the case in the April numbers. What we're seeing, even beyond these reports and these numbers, is the reality on the ground that people who are already vulnerable in the workforce, people who are already disadvantaged or facing extra barriers, are always the first to get hit when we have a difficult situation like this. That's why, as a society, not only do we need to do what we are doing in the short term to give extra supports to vulnerable people, but we need to make sure that as we move forward to rebuilding and creating a more prosperous Canada in the coming months and years, we think very, very carefully about how important the work is that is being done by women and vulnerable Canadians, and how we need to make sure we're better supporting them, not just for potential future crises, but for business as usual as our country comes back to normal. Cette crise a frappé très fort
This crisis
les femmes,
has
sur les gens
hit women and
vulnérables,
vulnerable
comme des
people,
nouveaux Canadiens
as well
ou
as
des
new
jeunes.
Canadians and young
Leurs
people
emplois
very,
ont
very
été
hard.
parmi les premiers
Their
à
jobs were among the first to
Et donc,
disappear.
c'est pour ça que nous avons
And
mis
that's
en place
why
des mesures
we
spécifiques
introduced
pour aider,
specific
ces gens
measures to
vulnérables
help those
particulièrement.
vulnerable Canadians in particular.
Mais au-delà de cette
But,
crise, nous devons réfléchir à comment, quand
Beyond
on
this
rebâtit
crisis, we will
l'économie,
have to
on va
look
s'assurer
at
que les
how
gens les
to
plus vulnérables
rebuild
soient
the economy
moins
and
vulnérables,
ensure at that point
dans la
that
économie,
vulnerable
qui
people
a
are
repris.
not
Comment on va s'assurer que dans
hit
les années
hard
à
in the
venir,
same way,
on s'occupe de
and
tous
how we're
et de
going
toutes
to
dans
look
ce pays,
after all
pour
Canadians
avoir un pays plus juste et
to
équitable.
have a fair
Follow-up, Mike.
country for everyone.
Yeah, yes, Prime Minister. Well, given that reality on the ground that you're talking about, and that these vulnerable people are, as you say, the first to get hit, how will you ensure that government stimulus money helps those people first and does not go instead to the bottom lines of big corporations?
Well, we are not yet talking about stimulus. We are still very much in the support and emergency phase right now. And that's why from the beginning, the measures we put forward have been entirely focused on Canadians. With the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, that's over 7 million people across this country who have benefited from that. With the wage subsidy that goes to workers. Employers don't keep a penny of that. They pass it through to their workers so that workers have that continued link with their job and get a paycheck that will ensure that as the economy reopens, they will be able to come back to work quickly and smoothly. Our focus every step of the way, even on supporting small businesses, has been ensuring that people are able to keep jobs going for Canadians from coast to coast to coast. We will, over the coming days, start looking at specific sectoral supports for various industries that have been hit particularly hard by COVID-19. But even then, our focus will be on the workers, on the supply chains that involve many, many small businesses across this country for many of these industries, and not on the corporate well-being of an industry or of a sector, but indeed staying focused on helping Canadians, because it is Canadians who are at the heart of our economic success, at the heart of our success as a country, and as a government, we will always stay focused on them.
Thank you. We'll take one more question on the phone. Operator.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Marie Vastel, Le Devoir. À vous.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. J'aimerais
Good morning,
revenir sur la
Mr.
prestation
Trudeau. I'd like to come back to the emergency response benefit. We're seeing that schools and daycares are starting to reopen, and there's a lot of questions about the teachers and the daycare workers who, at this point, are not feeling safe about going back to work and who may refuse. And as a result, they may want to get the response benefit. And yet the Quebec government is saying that this is a safe environment. Now, what should people do when they feel their workplace is not safe? Is that enough to apply for the emergency response benefit? Well, in no cases and at no time should a Canadian be working somewhere where they're concerned about their safety and their health. We have very specific and significant standards in place in this country to ensure that even in normal times, workers are able to work safely. Now, in this pandemic, those concerns are even greater, and that is why that in the principles that we put forward with the provinces and territories, the aspect of safety at work is absolutely critical when it comes to reopening the economy. And we expect that work conditions for Canadians, even for critical workers, will be safe enough for people to feel confident about returning to work.
I think one of the things that is fundamental in Canada is that no one, whether in crisis times or in regular times, should be working in a job in conditions that are unsafe or put them at risk. That is a fundamental principle of Canada that we will always ensure to uphold. In this particular situation, there are heightened concerns about health for a large number of people, or for everyone, but particularly and even in essential work sectors. We need to make sure that we are putting in place all the necessary measures so that people can feel confident about their own safety, about having minimized the risks as they get back to work. That's why we put that as one of the fundamental principles that needs to be in place before any sector talks about reopening the economy. That was part of the principles agreed to by the provinces and the federal government on relaunching our economy.
Minister Murray?
Follow-up?
Merci. Cela dit, vous parlez des
Having
conditions
said
qui
that,
doivent
we're
être
talking about
respectées, que
specific
ce lieu de travail-là
conditions that
soit
have to be
sécuritaire, mais
in
qui
place and that
détermine
workplaces
si
have to
le
be safe.
lieu de travail
But
est
how can
sécuritaire
you
ou pas?
determine whether a
Je vous
workplace
repose ma
is
question. Est-ce qu'une
safe?
personne
So my
peut
question
elle-même
again, can
déterminer dans sa
someone
perception
determine, based on
personnelle
their
qu'elle ne
own
se
personal
sent pas en
perception,
sécurité
that
d'aller
they are
travailler
not
dans une
safe
garderie?
in their
Ou
workplace, for
est-ce que le
example, a
gouvernement
daycare
va
center?
décider
And
de la
will the government
légitimité d'une
decide
demande de
to
PCU?
allow those
Je pense
people
que
to receive the response benefit? Well, I think, as is the case with any situation, depending on the different cases, the government will have things to say about the specific needs of certain sectors or industries. But we also know that in some cases, and that certainly applies to someone who is caring for a senior at home and feels particularly vulnerable or has a pre-existing medical condition, there, the levels of protection that are needed may vary from case to case, and we will all have to be very attentive to those realities and be reasonable in order to ensure that the proper measures are in place to protect people. Radio-Canada, there will be a recovery, an economic recovery in Canada at some point, and are there certain sectors of the economy that will need more support? And will you take advantage of that recovery to transform the Canadian economy? Well, certainly we will be gradually reopening the Canadian economy in many sectors right across the country. But at the same time, we will have to reflect on how that recovery should happen to ensure that people are safe, because COVID-19 will still be with us. But I think we also realize that there are both challenges and advantages in working at home, and I think we may have to invest more in digital technology and do things a bit more quickly in that area than before. We will also have to focus on the fight against climate change, and that will allow us to do more in some sectors of the economy. So I think it is important to think now about what the economy will look like 2 years from now or 10 years from now, and to start working on that. But at the same time, what we want, especially, is to again create prosperity for Canadians. Now, we saw in the numbers this morning that young people are particularly affected by job losses. Will you be extending the benefits for students? Now, we have already planned for that support for students to continue until August. Now, normally, students, when they finish their university or college year, get a job for the summer so that they have money to pay their tuition or meet their own personal needs during the school year. So the student assistance benefit is there to replace the thousands of jobs that simply will not be there for young people this summer. And we know that young people want to work and will be looking among the jobs that are being created through the summer jobs program and the new programs that have been created such as jobs in vulnerable sectors. But we want to help students to continue until September and beyond.
Mr. Tom Perry with CBC. Just I'd like to ask you about the jobs numbers again. You were talking about just how some groups are getting hit disproportionately hard, thinking young people, thinking women. What specifically can the government do as the recovery begins to make sure that these groups aren't permanently set back?
I think the idea of permanent challenges is particularly poignant for young people, where we know that a summer without work experience, a summer where they are struggling to pay their groceries or their rent, is a significant setback in their march towards economic independence and successful outcomes after their schooling. That's why we put in place the Canada Emergency Student Benefit, to help them this summer make sure that there aren't long-term impacts. On women particularly, that we've seen have been extremely impacted by this economic challenge as well as a health challenge. We have moved forward on supports for them, particularly more emergency supports for women who are facing challenges of domestic violence. But at the same time, we know we have to do more. The importance of childcare has been yet again emphasized, that as we move towards an economic restarting, there needs to be more and secure childcare spaces for people to get back into the workforce. These are the kinds of things that we're going to have to think about, both in the immediate, but also for the longer term, to make sure that equality in this country is more than just a goal, but is a concrete reality. Je pense qu'il y a bien des choses qui nous préoccupent.
I think there are a lot of concerns we all have about the future years, and groups like young people and women
avec des échos négatifs
could suffer the negative consequences of this crisis for many years, much longer than others. And that's precisely why we introduced the emergency student benefit, which will support students this summer until the end of August, so that they can continue their studies without feeling too much of an impact of this crisis, and also creating more job opportunities, so that many of them can gain the necessary experience that will be very helpful in the coming years. With respect to women, we know that there is always more to do to create a fairer society. We know that there needs to be more help for shelters and other facilities that help the victims of domestic violence. We have already provided assistance, but there's more to be done. Now, when it comes to daycare centers, of course, they are very important to Canada's recovery, and particularly important to families and women. And that's why we're looking exactly now at what we can do there.
Transit in Toronto, the TTC is going to be making some historic cuts to its service because of the pandemic. Transit groups have been calling on the federal government to provide emergency funding, keep buses, trains rolling, get emergency or essential workers to their jobs. Is that something that the government could look at?
This government has made historic investments in transit over the past years. We recognize that public transit is an essential part of growing the economy, of helping our cities, and mostly helping people be able to get to work from home in a reliable way. That's why we believe so deeply in transit. Operation of transit is more of a municipal and provincial responsibility, and we hope to see the provinces stepping up on supporting this essential element of the economic relaunch. People are going to need to be able to get to and from work as we want to get the economy going again. But the federal government is always looking to be a partner in helping out in terms of economic relaunch wherever we can.
Prime Minister, Rachel Haynes from CTV National News. Last week you were saying that help is coming for seniors. They have been asking for the last few weeks where the help for them is. You're talking about the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, which gives $2,000 to the people who you say need it most. But seniors are still vulnerable and they still need to pay their rent and their groceries, and they're saying that the government programs that they receive still don't add up to $2,000. So why do some people deserve $2,000 from the government and other people don't?
First of all, we have worked very, very hard to help all Canadians with replacement of income that has been lost during this. We knew that workers who were expecting to get a paycheck to be able to pay for their groceries, to be able to pay for their rent, and suddenly because of COVID-19 lost their job, and there were millions of them, as we saw in the recent job numbers today. Needed to get that income replacement. And we did that with the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. Seniors, many of whom are on fixed incomes, did not see that disappearance of their income at the same time, although some did, and many qualify for the CERB, even as seniors, and therefore are getting the support. At the same time, however, we recognize that there are additional costs and additional vulnerabilities that seniors have been facing, and that's why we have made investments, whether it's through increasing the GST supplement that hits many, many vulnerable seniors, whether it's through new programs that are supporting seniors in vulnerable situations. And like I said, we'll have more to say very soon on how we continue to support the seniors who built us this extraordinary country and to whom we owe so much thanks. Notre priorité dès le début a
Our
été
priority
de
right from the outset
remplacer,
has been to
le revenu de ceux qui
replace
avaient
the
tout à coup
income
perdu leur
of
job à
people who
cause de
had
la
suddenly
COVID-19.
lost their jobs
C'était
because
des
of
gens qui
COVID-19.
s'attendaient à
These
des
were
chèques de
people
paye
who
pour
expected to
pouvoir
receive
payer
a paycheck
leur épicerie,
in order to
payer,
pay for their groceries
leur loyer.
or pay their
Et
rent.
nous avions avancé avec des mesures
And so we
rapidement
came
avec la
forward
prestation
quickly with
pour
measures
les
such
aider.
as the
On voit
Canada
plus de 7
Emergency
millions de
Response
Canadiens
benefit. Some
qui
7
reçoivent cette
million
prestation,
Canadians are now receiving
de
that
façon,
benefit.
urgente et essentielle.
And it is
En même temps,
urgent
il y a
and
d'autres groupes
essential
comme
that
les
they have
aînés,
it.
où il y en a
Now,
plusieurs
for
qui
the
qualifient
seniors,
aussi pour cette
there are a
prestation
number
d'urgence
who will
parce
also
qu'ils avaient,
qualify for that
un revenu de
emergency
travail,
benefit because they
qui,
have
même s'ils ont
a
pas
work
perdu,
income. But
de
even
leur,
if they have not
de leur pension
lost
ou de
their
leur
pension
revenu fixe,
or their fixed
voient,
income,
plus de coûts ou plus de
they
défis à cause
are
de la
having to
COVID-19.
absorb
C'est
more
pour ça
costs because
qu'on a
of
pris les mesures
COVID-19.
qui ont fait
And that's why
ont eu un impact sur
we
que
have
ce soit
brought in
l'augmentation,
measures that
du
will have an
retour de
impact
la
on them,
TPS qui a aidé
whether
énormément
it
d'aînés, que
is
ce soit des programmes
additional
spécifiques qui les
GST
appuient.
payments or
On
specific
est là pour eux.
programs that
Et
support
comme
them.
j'ai dit, nous
We
allons
are there to
continuer
support them,
d'être là
and
pour eux.
we
On
will
va avoir
continue
des
to be there
annonces
for
dans
them,
les jours
and
à
we will
venir
have
sur
other
comment
announcements
on
to
va
make in the
aider
coming days
particulièrement
as to
nos
how
aînés les
we
plus
will provide
vulnérables,
special
qui
support
passent des
to
temps-
our
des moments
particularly
difficiles, et
vulnerable
au niveau de
seniors
la
who are
santé
going
et au
through
niveau de l'économie.
difficult times, both in terms of the economy and their
Prime
health.
Minister, a few minutes ago, in response to a colleague's question, you said that people don't have to go back to work if they don't feel safe there. Yesterday, workers outside of the Cargill meat plant, which is the largest outbreak in Canada, are saying that they don't feel safe going to work, even though their employers are saying that they've put measures in place. Should these workers be staying home, and what do you say to them if they're not feeling safe?
I'm not going to weigh in on specific cases in provincial jurisdiction, but I will say that it is a well-established principle in Canada and a hallmark of our values as a country that no one should be asked to work in unsafe conditions. That applies during a pandemic as well. We have put in many measures across various industries to minimize the risk, particularly around essential work. But we're going to have to be very careful to ensure that we're doing what we need to do right across the country, businesses, orders of governments, and all Canadians, to ensure the safety of the people who are working to provide for the rest of us.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Brian Mullen, Global News. Taiwan has donated 500,000 surgical masks needed by Canadian healthcare workers on the front lines of the pandemic. Your foreign minister wouldn't thank the country by name. Will you?
I'm happy to thank Taiwan for its generous donation. It is important at this point that Canadians and all people around the world pull together to be there for each other, because this is a global challenge that is going to face a global response. We need to do this together, and we will.
Marika Walsh with the Globe and Mail. The former Prime Minister of Australia, Malcolm Turnbull, says China is a bully and that the way for Canada to deal with China is to stand up for it instead of backing down. Is your government standing up to China, or is it backing away from China?
My responsibility as Prime Minister is to make sure that we're providing for Canadians and keeping Canadians safe. That's the job people expect me to do, and that is exactly what I'm doing. We're going to ensure that Canadians have the equipment, the supplies, the support they need to make it through this pandemic. Of course, at the same time, we will be asking difficult questions about how we're making it through this pandemic, how this came to happen, how we can learn from this. There'll be plenty of time for questions in the months to come. My focus, rightly, is on doing everything I can to help Canadians through this.
So are you standing up for China?
Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
All right, that is